So, right at the very southern tip of Manhattan, there's one of New York's most absolutely magnificent buildings. But what it's used for today is a whole world away from why it was first built. It's this really unexpected union, a grand temple to American commerce that became the home for a priceless and, frankly, vulnerable indigenous collection. So we're going to dive into how these two found each other, creating a totally new kind of museum for a new era.
And that is a fascinating question, right? To get to the bottom of it, we've actually got to follow two totally separate stories, one about a building and one about a collection, that were pretty much on a collision course for almost 100 years.
Okay, so our first story kicks off with the building itself, the Alexander Hamilton U.S. Custom House. And trust me, calling it a palace? That's not an exaggeration at all.
You know, this one spot, one bowling green, is just dripping with history. It was the site of the original Dutch fort that basically started New York City. Fast forward to 1902, the U.S. government starts building a monument to its economic might. For over 65 years, this place was the financial engine room for the Port of New York. But then, by 1973, that engine just went silent.
I mean, the architect, Cass Gilbert, he designed this Beaux-Arts masterpiece to do one thing: impress you. Its whole job was to shout about the power and wealth of the United States, because the customs duties they collected right here funded a massive chunk of the entire federal government. The outside is covered in these cool nautical themes and incredible sculptures, and inside, a giant rotunda is the centerpiece. This was the government's grand front door to global trade.
All right, now let's completely switch gears and head miles away, up to northern Manhattan. This is the story of an absolutely monumental collection of indigenous heritage that was, well, facing its own existential crisis. So this entire collection was the life's work of just one guy, George Gustav Heye. And he wasn't really a scholar. He was an obsessive, passionate collector. They even nicknamed him the boxcar collector because he had this all-consuming drive to acquire objects made by the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And when I say the scale of his collection is staggering, I mean, wow. We're talking nearly 1 million objects. And see, Heye didn't just go after the masterpieces. He collected, well, everything. You'd find these exquisite works of art right next to everyday things, like playing cards. It was, and it still is, one of the most complete records of indigenous material culture anywhere on the planet.
But, you know, after Heye died, his museum really fell on hard times. It was in a crumbling building way up in a remote part of the city. Then a huge scandal erupted when people found out priceless objects were being secretly traded away. And just hanging over all of this was the very real fear that this unique, independent collection would be broken up and just swallowed by the giant American Museum of Natural History.
For the museum's trustees, guys like the incredibly influential writer and activist Vine Deloria Jr., this was about way more than just a poorly managed museum. It was a fight for indigenous people to have real authority over their own cultural heritage. As he said, it was a struggle to control our collection. The stakes, they absolutely could not have been higher. And this is the turning point. This is where our two separate stories finally start to converge. Back in the 70s and 80s, both the Grand Custom House and the priceless Heye collection were just desperate for a future.
So think about it. On one side, you've got this empty palace, a massive historic building that the government literally called surplus. And on the other side, you have this homeless heritage, an invaluable collection without a safe home and in real danger of losing its independent future. It was kind of the perfect storm, right? A huge problem just waiting for an incredible, creative solution.
But of course, that solution didn't just fall out of the sky. It took years of really intense legal and political fights to bring these two histories together and, forge a new path. Okay, a huge turning point came in 1986. A judge made this momentous ruling that the collection could not be absorbed by another museum. I mean, for the Heye Foundation, this was basically their Independence Day. It saved the museum's identity and gave its trustees the power to finally decide their own destiny.
And from that point on, the pieces really started to fall into place. It took more years of tough negotiations, but finally, a deal was struck. The federal government would hand over the vacant Custom House, and the Heye collection would become the heart of the Smithsonian's new National Museum of the American Indian. In 1994, those doors finally opened to the public.
But look, this story is so much more than just a clever real estate deal. When this specific building and this specific collection came together, it created all these new, really profound layers of meaning.
And this might be the most incredible part of the whole story. That Custom House,
It stands at the very beginning of Broadway, and Broadway itself, it started as a walking trail used for centuries by the original people of this land, the Lenape. So the indigenous history of this exact spot was there the whole time, literally hiding right under the pavement.
It's a poetic transformation, isn't it? A building that was all about federal power and commerce now celebrates indigenous sovereignty. A place that once collected taxes from global trade now shares the stories of the hemisphere's first peoples. And a building that looked out over a busy harbor now looks out over the start of an ancient indigenous path.
You know, this whole process is a fantastic example of a really important idea called decolonizing the museum. It's all about shifting the authority, making sure that indigenous communities are the ones in the driver's seat, telling their own stories and taking care of their own heritage, even inside the walls of a national institution. What this story really shows us is that even the most imposing symbols of power aren't set in stone. They can be reclaimed, reimagined. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other hidden stories are our most famous buildings holding on to, just waiting for the right moment to come out?